Well, good morning, everybody, or depending on where you are, good afternoon. I think it's just about that time. Uh, my name is Tom Clark, and it's my job to welcome you here. Uh, I am the chair of Global Public Affairs. Just so you know what I'm doing now, Global Public Affairs is the largest privately held government relations and public affairs company in Canada, and we are and prior to that, especially for the Canadians on this call, you may, as they say on The Simpsons, you may remember me from such shows as the National News. I was a journalist for 45 years, both here in Canada and abroad, and in Washington and China and a whole bunch of other places. That's me. We are delighted as Global Public Affairs to be working again with Leger, which is one of the, if not the premier research, marketing, and polling company in this country and also the United States. They do terrific work. If you haven't heard of Leger before, this is your opportunity to meet some of the folks and take a look at some of their work. But we, as I said, we're thrilled once again to be partnering with Leger for this. So the topic of our conversation today, as you know, because you've all signed up for it, is assessing the impact of COVID-19 on tourism in North America. And it's not much of a mystery, the answer to that question. But just to set the landscape a little bit, tourism globally is a $9 trillion industry. That is 3 times the size of worldwide agriculture, just to give you an idea. And of course, it employs more people than the agricultural sector and the forestry sector and the mining sector and about 10 other sectors combined. In many parts of the world, in the United States and in Canada, tourism, in fact, is the only substantial industry that keeps towns or regions afloat. So what's happened? Well, as we've seen since March, there's been a plunge of 60 to 80%, depending on where you're looking in terms of the overall tourism from this time last year. And in many places in the airline industry, for example, it has plunged by 90 to 95%. Basically, COVID has taken its biggest bite out of the tourism industry. What we're going to be doing today, I'm going to introduce the panelists in a minute, and I'm going to introduce the meat on the plate, which will come from Edwin Sheppard of Leger, and we'll do that in just a second. But I want to make sure that this is conversational, that everybody has a sense of belonging or being able to participate in this conversation. It's a whole new world, isn't it? I mean, this whole business of being on little screens and talking intimately to hundreds of different people. So what we're going to do as this progresses, if you look on your screen, you will see a thing marked questions. So if you've got a question, if you've got a comment, if there's something that you want to say, put it in, push the button, I'll see it, and I'll make sure that it is integrated into the conversation that we're going to have. So we all want to make sure that what we're going to be talking about in the next hour is going to be relevant to you and your sector, and that's the whole point of the question box. The one other thing I'm going to tell you is that for your forward planning, if you've got something to do in about 56 minutes from now, you will be able to do it because this will end on time. I guarantee it. So let's begin. First of all, I want to introduce the panelists on who will be joining us today. First of all, B. Sarmiento, joining us from the Tampa area. She is the Senior Director of Research for Holiday Inn Club Vacations, representing primarily the area of timeshares, and that's a big part of what we're going to be talking about today. Chantz Strong is the Executive Director of Destination Canada, which is an organization, Chantz will tell you more about it, but it's an organization within Canada promoting Canadian tourism. We also have Monique Smith, sort of. Monique is, and I will introduce her properly when her internet starts working out of North Bay. If anybody knows an internet provider in North Bay, now's the time to let them know what you think about the service. Anyway, Monique is desperately trying to get back on. Former Minister of Tourism in the Ontario government, held numerous portfolios, was Ontario's first representative to Washington, D.C. She will be with us in a moment to give sort of the government perspective on what happens. But to start all this off, and as I said, it is the meat on the plate, let me introduce to you Dr. Eddie Sheppard. And Eddie is the Associate Vice President of Leger. And Eddie, you've been in the field, you've been gathering public sentiment towards tourism, what's going to work, what's not going to work. I'm going to pass it over to you.
Perfect. Thanks, Tom. So yeah, thanks for everyone for signing up today. The goal is to really just kind of share a snapshot of what we have found with a study that we ran in the middle of June to really get a sense of what is the pulse of the consumer side of the industry right now. So as Tom said, the tourism industry is one that has been impacted arguably like no other industry across the globe because of all the different arms that the industry does touch. So we really want to get a sense of how people are feeling and what their intentions are around travel and what will increase levels of comfort moving forward. So this is a snapshot of a much larger study that we did across North America to try and give you a sense of where everyone's kind of at in the current state. So as I said, we ran a study in mid to late June, and that's one thing to keep in mind as events definitely have changed since this study happened with respect to different levels of COVID outbreak happening across North America and the world. So sentiment has shifted a little bit, but it is still relatively accurate and consistent with what we're seeing right here. The study I'll show right now has over 2,000 Canadians and 1,000 Americans aged 18 and over. So that gives a brief overview. And we have a fairly spread out sample across Canada as well as the United States. So first and foremost is just how has COVID actually impacted Canadian travel? And for the most part, significant levels of cancellations and travel changes have occurred since the start of COVID. So 2/3 of Canadians and only 1/2 of Americans have either changed or canceled travel plans as a direct result of COVID-19. So people's intended plans for 2020 have been relatively upset, which on the operator side has had significant financial implications as well as just sustainability in the first place. So there still are a small percentage of people who do intend to travel in the coming year. But for the most part, the majority of individuals have canceled some or all of their travel plans. And the one thing you'll note throughout the deck here, if there's a green arrow pointing up, that means that particular percentage is significantly higher than the one that it corresponds to. Now, in terms of how they've actually shifted travel plans, so these are individuals who indicate they've just changed their travel plans in the first place. So 41% of Canadians and 39% of Americans have changed their trip to one that is domestic and that they can drive to. So there's a significant shift from international travel to domestic travel, while at the same time going from flight trips to driving trips. And this is where you'll see kind of the theme throughout is that there's a larger appetite for regional travel and provincial travel and state-based travel than there is for anything kind of internationally or even across your own country. So the majority of individuals have either postponed their trip to a later date, so they still have intentions to travel, but for the most part, people are still relatively uncertain. So when we look at people who have actually scheduled a future trip, it's only around 10 to 15% of people have already scheduled a trip for the future. So they have postponed their dates, but the date and time is still relatively uncertain based on the current events and how they unfold. So when we look at all the aspect there, we want to know kind of how are people really feeling? What are their current attitudes and their comfort around travel and tourism? So there's a lot of content here, but the main thing to focus on is that the red shows people's pre-COVID intentions, and the blue is their current level of comfort traveling to those destinations. So for example, for Canadians, you can see 2/3 were willing to take a staycation prior to COVID in the year 2020, but now that's dropped to about only 48% of people are comfortable taking a staycation. So you can see here, the main theme is that Canadians and Americans both have significantly reduced their levels of comfort with respect to travel across the globe. There is one indication at the bottom there where there's a bit of a larger appetite for international travel on the American side than there is on the Canadian side. So comfort levels for Canadians traveling to the US, to Mexico, and traveling abroad are significantly lower than they were prior to COVID. Whereas for the United States, the drop pre-COVID to now is much smaller in terms of their level of comfort and their intentions. So one thing we'll see throughout is that Canadians are showing indications of being a little more risk averse with respect to travel and moving forward than Americans are. So there is an appetite to travel, but comfort levels are exceptionally low right now. So our goal is to try and give you some insights in terms of what will help improve comfort and increase levels of comfort moving forward. With respect to mode of transportation, again, a similar thing in terms of the actual destination themselves. So you can see here, the majority of Canadians and Americans they're still comfortable taking a road trip right now, but the comfort levels have dropped substantially. Now, part of the mode of transportation side of things is the actual destination as opposed to the mode of transport. So it's the end point that people may be more concerned with, inability to receive COVID insurance and elements like that that are largely driving this. So it's not necessarily the vessel itself, but it's more so the end point that they're trying to get to. When it comes to airline travel, as Tom said, that's one industry that's been fairly heavily influenced. And projections are it will take 4 to 5 years for the airline industry to recover fully from the current events. So you can see that levels of comfort on international travel and domestic flights are substantially lower than they were prior to COVID-19. So that is an industry that is facing a relatively large uphill battle that they need to try and overcome those perceptions of decreased comfort. Now, the good thing is that people want to travel. So I think we're at the point now where we're 5 or 6 months into this, and everyone is kind of really, they want to get out and explore. And 73% of Canadians and 65% of Americans are looking forward to actually being able to travel again. Now, with that in mind, though, comfort levels are exceptionally low. So under half of Canadians and Americans would be comfortable traveling on their own right now, as well as traveling with their family. So again, this is the common theme, is that comfort has been extremely impacted by COVID-19. And with that, 3/4 of Canadians are willing to wait until it's safe to travel again, while only 2/3 of Americans are willing to do so. So people want to travel, and then they're really eager to get out there, but at the same time, comfort levels are lower than ever, arguably, and people are willing to wait a little bit longer to ensure safety while traveling. And with that as well, we're going to start to see a pretty substantial shift in how we travel. So 3/4 of Canadians intend to change how they travel moving forward, and this can be right down to selecting destinations, to what they bring on travel, to who they bring, to the attractions and landmarks they're visiting. There's going to be a huge shift in people's perception of what and where they want to go. Then that's compared to only 68% of Americans. So more Canadians are likely to change how they travel, but at the same time, 2/3 of Americans are very willing to change how they travel moving forward. And on the right there, you see just kind of some main themes in terms of how we're going to change moving forward. So the primary one being that and Canadians are more likely to only travel to areas where COVID-19 is stabilized. And that's a pretty significant difference between the perception of Americans on that point there. People really want to avoid places with large gatherings of individuals, as well as traveling during peak season. So this gets the perception that people do want to find ways to avoid groups and gatherings. And as we'll see later on, it gets into the idea that outdoor attractions and landmarks and things like that are far more appealing to people right now. So the ability to actually stay in a more open environment is what people are looking forward to moving forward. In terms of impacting future plans, there are substantial perception differences between Canadians and Americans here. So this is where I discuss the idea of being a little more risk averse. So Canadians report significantly higher agreement with fears of a second wave of COVID, fears of contracting them or their family contracting COVID compared to Americans. Now, in the box there, this is what's a little more actionable in terms of the operators who are on the call here. So people, in terms of impacting future travel plans, it's largely based on cost as well as accessibility. So the increased cost of accommodations as well as the increased cost of air travel will have huge implications in terms of people and their willingness or ability to travel moving forward. And one element that's not on here is the loss of personal income. So that will have a huge implication in terms of what people can actually afford to do and what they're willing to do, as well as the availability of flights to the destinations they want to travel. So the airline industry has really shifted a lot of their flight paths and availability and offerings. So if flights aren't available and they're far more expensive, it's going to really kind of decrease the ability of people to travel moving forward. And on this slide here, when you ask people what they're looking for when they want to travel, pre-COVID, the typical answers are around things like iconic landmarks, major attractions, cultural attractions. They're looking for affordability. They're looking for good reviews online that will help them move towards certain areas. Now, when we ask people what are the top factors when selecting a future experience, these are actually now the top 3 indicators of future travel. So these 3 elements come before iconic landmarks, fun experiences, major attractions. And the number one being that people are really looking for clear communication of measures put in place to protect them from COVID-19. And now when you think of yourself as being an operator or a destination or an airline or a hotel, it's really important to clearly express to individuals what you are doing to ensure their safety, the measures that you're putting forth to make sure that you're sanitizing and cleaning regularly. And the one thing we found in this study as well is that people need visible cleaning and sanitation. So it's not just necessarily that you say you're doing it, they also need to see people doing it as well. So it just gives them a little more peace of mind when they can actually see people physically cleaning and sanitizing areas. But for one aspect, the clear communication is going to be essential for operators moving forward with respect to what they're doing to prevent people or protect people, sorry, from COVID. Also, the area being designated free from COVID-19 and the ability to avoid large crowds. So if you have an area in which you can promote that people can find their own space and explore and escape the crowd and quote unquote get off the unbeaten path, or get on the unbeaten path, it's a huge win for your operations, because then people will have that level of comfort and security that they're looking for moving forward. And then in terms of improving comfort levels, the top one that will improve comfort moving forward with COVID is just the availability of a vaccine. And we have actually found that Canadians are far less willing to travel internationally than Americans are until there is a vaccine for COVID-19. So 1 in 3 Canadians, compared to 1 in 5 Americans, will not travel or not feel comfortable traveling internationally until there is a vaccine for COVID-19. So that will have huge implications for international travel, as well as the slowdown of the spread of COVID-19. The government side of things, in terms of the government saying that it's safe to travel or a reputed medical authority saying so, Canadians are also more influenced by this than Americans are, and this is largely with domestic travel. So Canadians indicated that they were more willing to travel outside of their province when the government says it's safe to do so, whereas Americans are far less influenced by the federal government than the Canadians indicated that they were. So just a few last things to click through here before we get into the larger discussion here. So now we want to see what people's intentions are moving forward. So we know that in terms of comfort, it's a lot around safety and security and sanitizing and cleaning and just a relatively safer mindset around the spread of COVID. Now, in terms of the next few months, there will be a huge push towards the local, regional, and staycation kind of based travel. So 2/3 of Canadians and half of Americans plan to take more staycations and explore their local region in the next 12 months, as well as 61% and 51% traveling within their province or state in the next 12 months. And that shifts to 3/4 of Canadians will plan to take fewer international trips, that being to the States or abroad, in the next 12 months, compared to only 1/2 of Americans. So once again, you see that larger shift there in Canadians being relatively unwilling to travel internationally until there is a vaccine or until there is some assurance of stability around COVID rates compared to the American population. When it comes to accommodations, this is us asking in the next 12 months, what accommodations are you likely to stay in? You can see that hotels 4 stars or more is the number one element there, but also with family and friends. And the family and friends piece really gets into that staycation idea, or the traveling within local regions. So people are more willing to stay in an area that they're a little more comfortable with and a little more familiar with than the unknown. When you go further down there, people are less willing to stay in areas that they might arguably be more uncertain of in terms of what the offerings are. So this is where that idea of clear communications comes into play for those operators, like the bed and breakfasts, the unique accommodations, timeshares, cottages and cabins, depending where you live, how you want to call them. So the communications for these elements there will help drive up people's willingness to stay, but they need that in place. And when we asked what would increase your willingness to stay in a hotel for a staycation, the 3 things were being affordability, cleaning and sanitization, and then COVID-19 regulations being in place. And with such a large proportion of people being willing to take or being motivated to take staycations, it's really important for the local operators to try and understand what they can do to get people in the door. And I know a lot of businesses are shifting towards discounts for locals and things like that, which is a really big benefit to try and get those locals to stay within their accommodations. For future travel type, basically what we're seeing here across the top, it's events that will happen to increase comfort. So the red there on the left is their willingness to be comfortable right now to go to these areas. The next one being once the government says it's safe to do so. The next one being not until there's a vaccine. And the last one that they would have not gone there in the first place. So we can see right away the visiting outdoor attractions and staying in outdoor accommodations several people are comfortable doing that right now. And this is where we get into the idea of the ability to distance from others and avoid large gatherings. As you go down, comfort levels decrease quite a bit more with respect to the inability to avoid others, the unknown and the uncertainty around what to expect largely with those areas. And you can see that, again, the vaccine for COVID-19 will heavily influence people's willingness to stay in these areas. But you know, the main thing is to really try and influence perceptions of comfort right now with individuals. And the last one here is just people's future travel attractions they're looking for. And again, in terms of the next 12 months, you can see right away the top 3 things are those more outdoor open experiences. So people are very motivated to visiting parks, whether it's local, provincial, or national. And being in Calgary, I can attest to that people are very much motivated to visit the provincial parks in the area, visit a farmer's market, other types of outdoor markets, and then visiting major landmarks or attractions. And you can see kind of going down, it's the areas that are a little more congested, I would say, that people are less comfortable or less willing to visit in the next 12 months. So any opportunity you have to limit the amount of individuals in a space and provide the social distancing will have a huge impact on people's willingness to visit your attractions moving forward. And that is everything in a very short nutshell.
Eddie, that's terrific. And let me just jump to one thing that has already come in terms of questions, and that is, would Leger be sharing these numbers with people who have signed up for this webinar? I will point out that Eddie's work goes much deeper than this, but that is a commercial arrangement that you would have to make with Leger. But Eddie, I leave it up to you in terms of sharing this with others, but I think this is recorded in any case.
Yep, the recording will be available to people who are in attendance. So as long as you've signed up and you're attending right now, then you will get the recording.
Perfect.
But there is a much larger piece, as Tom said, that's a more significant breakdown of provincial differences and state-based differences that we also have. So
perfect. Okay. And for that, give Leger a call. Fascinating stuff in here. I think some of it is discouraging, and other parts of it show little cracks of light and perhaps a way forward. But I wanted to start off just very quickly. Let me introduce to you. She's not Pamela Smith, although that's what it says on the screen. That is, in fact, Monique Smith, who I have already introduced, and has, you know, oodles of experience in government and so on. Monique, I just wanted to start off very briefly from a government perspective. Put back your government lens on your face again on this. What responsibility? Because in large measure, you know, in terms of industry support over the years, tourism has always been sort of, and you would know this as a former minister of tourism, is not in the same category as resource extraction or manufacturing or whatever in terms of what the government thinks and hopes. But considering the cratering that is going on now, what is the proper governmental response to all of this?
Well, I think the, you know, historically, we've always had a partnership with our partners in the tourism sector. And we've tried to provide support, particularly around marketing, and Chantz can speak to that from Destinations Canada, and we have Destinations Ontario and the Ontario Tourism Marketing Partnership, which are government agencies which have always worked to support the industry and assist where we can. Right now, I know that the Ontario Tourism Marketing Partnership and Destinations Ontario are providing monthly updates, and I probably more often than that, to the sector with all kinds of information around, similar to what we did here today in a nutshell, but around what people's expectations are and what's happening. I think right now, given the situation that we're in, that probably the most important piece of help that the government can give to the industry is certainty around the health standards, around the numbers, around our approach to COVID, so that we can tell everybody exactly how safe it is to travel in Canada, and you know, what I think part of the struggle, and I see that through Eddie's data, is the uncertainty that people have. And I know that people are struggling even within Ontario itself on stage 1, stage 2, stage 3, stage 4. What stage are you in? What part of the province are you in? Which, what can you do? What can you not do? So I think the certainty around all of that for potential travelers is going to assist assist our partners a great deal.
Okay, thank you. Somebody has pointed out to me that your video is upside down. And I just point out, no, Monique always stands on her head when she does this sort of stuff.
Make it more interesting.
Chantz, I want to direct some stuff. Well, first of all, I just want to say to everybody, thank you, and continue sending in your questions and comments, because they will form the basis of what we're going to be talking about. But just as a top line reaction, Chantz, when you see this, and let me put this in the form of a question, you're, as Destination Canada, trying to get people obviously to visit Canada as a destination. Is there a bright spot in all of this data for you when you take a look at this?
I think how we're approaching it is, obviously there is a lot of uncertainty. Our job is to support a profitable tourism industry for Canada. And so what we've done is we've pivoted to encouraging locals to travel more. I think if I was to provide some thoughts and some advice for the tourism industry, the core things that we're seeing is this is different than other things we would have seen before. The importance of your local or near local communities to be those people who are going to bring in revenue to tourism businesses is critical. The other part that's different than anything else we've seen for tourism is that residents in your community, they're the ones who will support or not support bringing in visitors. So you really have to start thinking about how can you make not only travelers feel safe, but your community feel as if you are protecting them. And so I really like Eddie's points around the visible cleaning measures. Our research says there's no one silver bullet. It really is kind of a broad range of health, sanitation, and cleaning measures. So that's kind of the core that I would look to. The bright spot, if there is one, is that for some parts of the population, even though we know GDP is going to go down significantly this year, we do see some parts of the population, their savings are actually increasing. So they're not spending money as they normally would. And so they do have savings. They've been trapped in their house and they want to get out. The other implication of having a closed border is people can't travel internationally. Canadians are one of the largest travel markets in the world. We travel internationally a lot. And so now we have a border that is kind of keeping us close to home. This is the time for Canadian businesses to really get Canadians to explore their backyards. So those would be the two bright spots. There's more savings and more opportunity for Canadians to really get to know their own backyard.
Great, and there's some terrific questions coming in. So let me get right down to some of them. And I want to. This may be a little bit local, but it would apply as much in Canada as it would in the United States. And that is, you know, we think of tourism sometimes in very big groupings, big corporate organizations, and so on. But here from Bridget Belanger is a question about how do you see the future of bed and breakfasts? You know, usually run by one couple, and maybe the other person is out doing another sort of job. Does anybody see that surviving this? And you know, Eddie, I don't know if any of that showed up in your numbers or not specifically, but what's your sense?
It didn't show up explicitly in our numbers, but you know, bed and breakfast, much like any other kind of accommodation, they're going to need to shift how they kind of run their operations, and B might have a sense on this here, but at the same time, given the size of a bed and breakfast, it will be more impacted by the changes that will have to take place with respect to the distancing and the time between rooms and elements like that. So I can see there being a bit of a decrease in the amount that you can offer in terms of accommodate or nights available or rooms available. But at the same time, that communications piece will be essential for a place like a bed and breakfast, because people need to truly understand and know what you're doing to ensure their safety. And I know some of the larger online rentals and accommodations that you can look into, they're putting things on their website that have information with respect to the cleaning procedures that are in place and the time between rentals and things like that. So I think bed and breakfasts they'll be similarly impacted compared to kind of some smaller hotels, but it'll just be more significant in terms of the impact that they'll feel because of the sheer size of the accommodation.
Okay, and let me go down to just outside of Tampa, where we find B. Sarmiento, of Director of Research for Holiday Inns. B, your main area, of course, is timeshare and that part of the tourism market. It was interesting in Eddie's presentation that when people were asked about future travel, the numbers were rather small for timeshares. So I just want you to react to what you've seen so far, and also, let me put this in form of a question. How do you see the pitch for timeshares changing, if at all, as we go through this?
Right. I mean, I think the numbers that Eddie showed is quite in line with the incidence of timeshare ownership in the US. I think the first one you showed like 9% planning to stay in timeshare resorts. That's roughly the incidence level of ownership in the US. That's kind of right on the spot. Interesting though there was that one of the slides pointed to future travel accommodations, and the timeshare numbers there slightly increased to 16%. So I think that's kind of good news. We don't know how future is future, but certainly something to look forward to. The state of the timeshare industry, though, is quite different in the sense that timeshare owners are already invested in that ownership. So it's not like, a typical traveler who's going to book something and spend for it. This one's the timeshare owners already own and they have points. One of the key concerns they have is really whether they would be able to change and cancel their bookings without losing those points. But it's slightly a different context compared to a traditional traveler. So that's in a way good for us. But in terms of sales, though, building on sales for timeshares, that's probably the area that will be tougher for our business, is how do we grow the revenue, considering we cannot do the traditional sales approaches that we used to do pre-COVID.
Mm-hmm. And let me extract, yeah, go ahead, Monique.
Sorry, with respect to the bed and breakfast and other smaller entities, I would say, just echoing what Chantz said and what Eddie's data shows, the information that you provide to your potential visitor is hugely important. So I know that there's some Airbnb data that shows that, their numbers are up in rural and smaller communities and down in like Toronto, Montreal, Vancouver. So we know that people are trying to get out of town. We know that cottage numbers are up, people looking for vacation homes. And so I think the bed and breakfast could be in that similar zone. And I think what they need to do is really, and I find this here up in Northern Ontario, we need our small businesses. I know they're tapped out. There's so much they're trying to do to survive, but we need them to communicate well with the public what they're doing and what protections they're taking. I belong to a bunch of airline loyalty programs because I lived in the States and I travel a lot. And I know that, they're all telling me, and a lot of hotel chains are telling me, here's what we're doing to keep our rooms clean. We expect you to come back. Here's what we're doing on our airlines to keep things clean and to protect your safety. But I think our smaller businesses have to try to do that more kind of upfront, front page. Here's a picture of my bed and breakfast and here's what we're doing. So I don't have to look too far to find it. And I know that, and I feel immediately that this is the concern that you're taking for my safety and well-being.
Okay. I want to take a look at Haley Burns. And Haley, forgive me for, I'll have to, here we go. And this is for anybody who wants to pick it up. Haley asks this: how do you think governments can help better plan for tourism infrastructure moving forward if the increase in outdoor traveling continues long term? So in other words, we look at this problem perhaps as a fix for 6 months or a year, but is it possible that fundamentals are shifting in the tourism business, and how do you plan and how do you implement? And a lot of folks in the room right now are saying, I don't give me 30,000-foot level stuff. Put it right on the ground because I got to meet payroll tomorrow. So dealing with Haley's question, Chantz, do you want to start with that? I saw you nodding.
Yeah, I mean, I think what we feel is going to happen is there will be a new normal, so to speak. Things will change a little bit. I think for the SMEs, probably the piece to keep in mind is we don't know how it's going to change to, but if, not to harp on the point, but if you can find ways to take these things that you're hearing around distancing, around outdoors, around giving people space and integrate it into your experience. So an idea that some small business owners have done is they've set it up so that there's specific picture taking spots. So you've got a clear, unobstructed view of the thing that you want to take a picture with or at. You've got your 2 meters. And then the great thing about that is you don't have anyone in your way. So you no longer have to deal with, having all these other people that you're waiting to get out of the way. Other ideas we've heard is instead of charging by travel party, you charge by travel bubble. So you have people pre-identify as a bubble and then they go as that. And so there are different ways to take advantage of it, to integrate it into your experience, to make it more appealing, more attractive. And I think the ones that'll really thrive are the ones who can figure out that way to both make it a better experience while protecting the safety of their guests.
B, let me throw this back to you because so much of what your business is, and forgive me if I'm oversimplifying it, I mean, that's what I did for 50 years, but let me ask this. So much of, when people are buying timeshares, they're buying a certain amount of predictability as well. They're buying something that says, I know where I'm going to be in the second week of November. Now, I understand you can change it up and you can move other places, but primarily it's sort of, there's a very predictable aspect to all of this. What we're talking about now is a world of unpredictability. Does that work for or against you?
It's certainly in a lot of ways against. I think, just the whole nature of COVID affecting travel per se is definitely going to affect us in a negative way. But it had also pushed a lot of digital transformation, accelerating a lot of initiatives within the industry. Things that probably previous to COVID would have taken us longer to get into. Now we're kind of accelerating all of those initiatives to be able to grow or maximize our opportunities given the pandemic.
Okay.
So yeah, a lot of digital transformation, a lot of push on content marketing, performance marketing, a lot more creativity around marketing and sales.
I just wanted all of us to deal for a second with the question of messaging, because there's a lot of questions that are coming in about the nature of it. And I know, Eddie, in your piece, one of the highest numbers that you got were people saying, I want clear messaging. I want to understand exactly what is going on before I feel comfortable. So it's communicating standards, and you were talking about health protocols and that sort of thing. Unpacking that, there's a couple of interesting questions, because the more you do on health protocols, obviously your costs go up, and how do you remain competitive in a world where there is overcapacity and cost really matters? And perhaps we can deal with that, but also it was interesting. I was reading just the other day that that of all the countries in Europe, Greece, believe it or not, is the one that's come out the best in all of this, because Greece figured out the communications before anybody else did, before Croatia did, before Spain did. And it is now the top tourist destination for Germany, or Germans going to Greece. So, I mean, there is a sort of a proof of concept in clear communications. I've thrown out a couple of things there, and Eddie or Monique, if you want to start it off, we're talking about clarity, and we're talking about costs of the new protocols.
Yeah, I think we've done some work on the operator side as well at Leger here, and one of the things that a lot of operators need, as you said, Tom, is that it's the financial implications of all of this for the operator that they're having such a hard time staying afloat now that they also now have to pay for additional sanitization and cleaning, as well as marketing and messaging. So there's a real financial challenge for a lot of these operators, regardless of size, even smaller or large. So what we're seeing is that a lot of operators are seeking help from the larger DMOs or different partnerships or relationships to help support the marketing efforts to educate people in terms of what's being done in the region, let alone for their actual business. So I think there's definitely a need on both sides, the consumer side needing to know what's being done and the operator side needing assistance in terms of telling people what is being done. So it's kind of a bit there, but I think, as you touched on, it's the uncertainty that is a huge factor for people, is that they just don't really know what to expect. And I think as the new normal is starting to unfold, people are becoming a little more familiar with the offerings and what is being there, and they're getting more comfortable going to restaurants and places like that. Yeah, as we've said here, you can go across province to province and state by state, and there's different measures put in place. So there's really a lack of consistency across the countries that make it challenging as well for those communications. So I think any way to just, it's all alleviating uncertainty and improving comfort. Those are the two largest things that we've really touched on here. Monique, did you want to expand on that at all?
Yeah, I think the alleviating uncertainty goes back to my first point, which is just clarity for people to understand, what the expectations are, what protections are in place. I think, England recently shutting the doors to Spain, or, imposing the self-isolation again around visitors coming in from Spain, has caused a great deal of uncertainty and thrown people for a loop, because it happens so quickly, and it just like hit the whole industry. I think that kind of jarring announcement is going to impact a lot of the tourism sector. So I think we need to have a consistent kind of moving forward approach, so people understand, okay, now this is possible, now this is possible, this is what's happening here. I think communities that are promoting what safety procedures are in place, and also what their numbers are as far as numbers of cases, I think those communities are in a better state, because they're seeming to be attractive. Now, that's a double-edged sword, because we've also seen numbers where communities don't want to promote that they can that they're in good shape, because they don't want the outsiders to come in and bring the virus in. So to go back to Chance's point earlier, the welcoming community. I mean, we've seen newscasts here in Canada about the maritime provinces and creating the bubble, but then also being quite aggressive to people who are there with out of province license plates.
Well,
support the tourism sector.
Okay.
Sorry.
No, it's not your fault. It's this wonderful world of technology we live in. But your point was made. I want to sort of wrap in a couple of comments here that we're getting on communication, imagery, and marketing. And it's interesting. When I used to live in China, and I would occasionally go down to Hong Kong to get supplies and food. This was back in the early 80s, very early 80s. And there was a commercial that ran on Hong Kong television at the time. And all it was for 1 minute were 3 people riding horses in wide open country. There was no brand placement. I had no idea what they were selling. It was just 3 happy people on horseback, just riding for a minute. And at the end, I think it was Courvoisier or something. And I asked, when I was there, I asked one of the marketing companies down there why that was. And they said, well, because what we're selling is the notion of wide open spaces. Because if you live in Hong Kong, that's the one thing that you want that is for sale, but it's not for sale here. You got to go somewhere to get it. So it comes down to this, somebody was pointing out, for example, the heavy use now of parks now that they're open, this whole notion that taking Eddie's numbers and saying, what are the major concerns? Well, the major concerns are you don't want to be in crowds, you don't want to be on airplanes where there's a lot of people around. And B, I would think that this would apply as much to your end of the business as it would to Chantz. And that is, are we going to see a change in the marketing style? In other words, instead of showing people in bathrobes with glasses of wine and sort of saying, come and join us here, are you going to start showing people in wide open fields with nobody else around and perhaps wearing a mask? At what point does the imagery, which read marketing, catch up with the reality? And how much do you push that? Chantz, I'll start with you on this.
Yeah, no, it's a great point. We actually have scrubbed, to the extent possible, all of our imagery to focus on distance, providing those more open vistas. Not to say we're not promoting towns and cities. You can be safe in towns and cities, but just the way you do it. So you don't want to show someone, as you said, having a cocktail on a crowded sort of wonderful patio. Maybe you want to change the imagery to have a little bit more space, a little bit more openness. And I think that's the core part to that, is just be aware of how it'll be perceived, and try and integrate that in as much as possible. So we've already started down that road. And I think Eddie's point on working within your community with your destination marketing organization is a key one. They are all working to provide this sort of information. So for example, everyone has on their websites, here's the restrictions. Here's how you as a traveler can travel safely. We've got a little video out that says, hey, if you're gonna travel, check out these resources. Take a little Ziploc baggie with you with your mask in it, your hand sanitizer. It's really easy. Nothing's really changed. So I think there's a lot of people who are in this with all the operators, and we are working together to get it figured out. So I think this is the time to work more and more as a network, as an ecosystem, and as a community, and make sure that you go to and take advantage of all these resources that are being developed. So that'd be the way I
think.
Yeah, sorry, go ahead, Eddie, and then I want to get B in. Yeah.
With that as well, Chantz, I think being in Alberta, I see a lot of the commercials for Alberta-based products. I know that Travel Alberta, they've kind of shifted towards that as well in terms of their campaign of Worth the Wait, and showing those open vistas and providing that space and distancing as well. So they're really transitioning into that ability to provide the open space and access to people to socially distance, and then Worth the Wait as well as kind of building that anticipation of once people are ready, we're here and we're going to be here. So it's really kind of capitalizing on both of those opportunities.
B, let me ask you this, because it would seem to me that, we were talking a minute ago about how you market and whether you change your approach and so on. But timeshares, I mean, would you buy into this idea that perhaps now part of the marketing would have to be along the lines of you can be in your own cocoon if you want, and you can be next to the big mountains where you can go on hikes and not see anybody? I mean, is that part of the new way?
Yeah, that actually is one of the things that worked in favor of the timeshare industry during this pandemic, because inherent into the timeshare resorts are really the wide spaces, the big villas or units. So it really is a kind of perfect or better setting for vacationing compared to traditional rooms, for example. There's more wide open spaces. So that's definitely something that a lot of timeshare companies have been focusing on this past few months or past couple of months, given the pandemic. The other thing too, like you said, is really the location itself. We noticed too that a lot more families and timeshare owners are keen in booking reservations in resorts that are nearer parks, where they can do more hiking, more outdoor activities compared to the other locations that were popular in the past, like metros and other more crowded attractions. So there's a focus towards resorts for these parks and other outdoor activities as attractions than the others. So these are two areas that a lot of timeshare companies have been focusing in the past couple of months, because this really work for us, and these are key things that consumers nowadays are looking for to keep them safe.
Okay, and thanks, B. And I'm trying to sort of bunch of comments, and thank you very much, everybody in the room. These are great comments and questions. I'm trying to get at least to the topic. If I can't get your individual question. But what seems to be coming up on this particular one is that's great if your particular location is near a national park or a mountain or something like that where you can sell that. But urban tourism, which has been really the backbone of a lot of tourism around the world, is cratering, and really, you know, in terms of what we're talking about, doesn't seem to have an out. I mean, you can't say, hey, come to the Champs-Elysees, nobody's there. You know, it's sort of not a great marketing tool. So the question then becomes effective government help. And, you know, a lot of comments, incidentally, I will tell you, people are saying, we got enough information. In fact, we're being buried in information. What we need is actual support on the ground right now. So let's put all those things together for a moment, and that is urban tourism, which doesn't have much of a, you know, an escape hatch here on the basis of wide open spaces. Secondly, we're coming to effectively the end, near the end of the summer tourist season. What happens in terms of marketing and help and so on as we prepare for the next big tourist time? And let me put it into a very simple question. Other than providing people with information and what governments are doing to provide even more information, should there be a Marshall Plan for tourism in the United States and Canada? Now, don't all rush to answer that question, but Monique, let me start with you, because not too long ago, you'd be the person who would actually be writing the checks.
Absolutely, and I would be advocating for the industry and preparing for the kind of rebirth. So, you know, so many of our attractions are in urban centers and have been shuttered. So how do we prepare for the next phase? So COVID isn't going away. We will have a vaccine at some point, but we will still have caution and we will still have concerns. So how, you know, to Chance's point, how do we adapt some of our large institutions to the new normal, and what infrastructure investments need to be made to allow for those institutions to reopen safely? It saddens me greatly to see Eddie's numbers that show the cultural institutions, the museums, the art galleries at the lowest end of the spectrum as far as where people feel comfortable going. And so I think we need to work with that sector and the urban sector generally on what do we need to do to make it easier for people to come back when it is safer to come back. And I think one of the things we do, which is what we've kind of done throughout the whole pandemic, is look to the markets that are a month or two ahead of us, or 3 months ahead of us, and see what they're doing and how is Europe adapting and what is happening there in their large institutions. What are some of the best practices we can start to adopt early on so that we're prepared when people are comfortable to come back? That would be my suggestions at this point. But again, it's like nobody has a crystal ball to figure out when it is people will feel comfortable again, unfortunately.
Chantz, can I sort of throw that over to you with one sort of additional angle to it? Because a number of people have been asking that in terms of the marketing, to get whatever we can out of the market, should there be a more coordinated approach? What about alliances? What about, you know, traditional competitors perhaps working together because we are in this desperate situation? I mean, that's really right up your alley. What do you think? Effective government help and industry alliances.
Right. So what is unique about Canada is, despite the fact that our different destination marketing organizations are in essence competitors, they're looking to get the same traveler to go to their destination. What we've seen from the beginning of this onwards is unprecedented amounts of cooperation. So we've actually very quickly made plans to make sure that everyone gets as much benefit as possible out of this, and that each organization has their own swim lanes. So the provincial marketing organizations are marketing within the province. Ourselves, we're trying to get people to move over provincial lines. We have a lot of coordination within the country. We've been reaching out as Destination Canada, so the National Tourism Organization, We've been reaching out to other countries to find out what they are doing. I think someone mentioned Britain, the Netherlands, Germany. We are looking to all of these other countries to understand what's going on in those markets, to better understand what their context is and how we can learn from them. In terms of kind of effective government support moving forward, what this has done is this has identified some very critical vulnerabilities of the tourism sector. We are incredibly dependent on 2 months, in essence, for our profits, July and August. And so we need to get creative on how we can spread that out so that we can get revenue year round. And this will help the cities, this will help the smaller regions. How do we get travelers to feel comfortable and safe traveling outside of those peak months? June, May, March, February. If we can get them to spread out and we can get people to not visit during these intense periods in July and August only, I think that will make the overall tourism industry much more resilient. And so how can we adapt our practices, our marketing, and basically how we operate? In some cities, we actually shut down after Labor Day. That doesn't really encourage a lot of travel in October, despite the fact that it might be the most beautiful time of year to visit. So how can we figure out address those key vulnerabilities and make ourselves more resilient for more year-round tourism? I think that is the core issue we're going to have to grapple with.
Okay. Eddie, let me ask you this, and it's been pointed out by a couple of folks who have written in here that your numbers, although they're pretty recent, were basically taken in June. And as we all know, this, the revelations of COVID make June seem like a century ago. And no doubt in 2 months from now, this will be like talking about the Roman Empire, what we're doing. But do you think there's an advantage? And let me throw it out to everybody. Do you think there'd be advantage in running these numbers again in the near future to see where the trend lines are, whether anything is changing, whether people's opinions are changing on all of this? Eddie, you're the doctor here. What do you think?
No, absolutely, and that's our intention too, is to track this over time. Just as you said, things are so fluid right now that they can change within a day or a week, depending on what happens on the global scale. So the intent is to continue to track this over time. That way, we provide the up-to-date insights, because as you said, Tom, in this time right now, you can't base your operational decisions on data that came 4 or 5 months ago. So it's important to have that continuous tracking. And we're doing that with our weekly COVID tracker as well. And we're seeing significant shifts in the recent weeks, as well as things have kind of continued to unfold. So tourism perceptions around comfort and security will be no different than that. So it's really important to continue to track people's sentiment towards travel and really understand where people are at with respect to what their intent to travel is, their comfort to travel, and those different elements. So 100%, the idea of tracking over time is essential for this kind of industry.
Okay, and Chantz, I'll come to you in a second. I just want to say to everybody in the room, go to the question thing. Let us know whether you think that would be useful or not to carry on this discussion. It'd be a good sampling to find out what you think. Chantz, go ahead.
Yeah, and I think this demand for up-to-date information is more critical than ever before. And so I'll just make a quick plug. We have a partnership with Leger where we do weekly tracking of sentiment of residents with respect to their comfort level. So that's up on our web every week. The other thing you can find is up-to-date restrictions. So what's going on in Canada in terms of travel measures, restrictions, that is updated every week. So these are resources that you can go to quickly, either as an operator to link to, or as a consumer to find out what's going on. So that's at our website, destinationcanada.com, and we do a lot of that in partnership with Leger.
Mm-hmm. And I just want to point out that we've got a lot of American operators on this call, and I thank you all very much for joining in, because we share this common problem. We share a border that is not open at the moment, which is complicating things for everybody, of course. Listen, I've got less than a minute left. If anybody wants to give one final, and B, because you operate in a very specific area, give me some idea of what you're expecting in the next 6 months in terms of the viability of your business.
Well, summer is almost over and school is about to start. So this is why, like to Eddie's point, I think we're all looking forward to some monitoring all this data and looking at how this changes in the next few months. So that's really important for us to monitor and look at. I think one of the key things, just to add on to what everybody else talked about on urban tourism, is that one aspect that I noticed in Eddie's data is about staycations. So this is probably one thing that a lot of the companies in the travel industry should be considering. It's a key future intent. Plus, it's a viable opportunity for us to take advantage of in the next few months.
Okay. Monique, I'm going to have to play the heavy here and say that we've appreciated your comments, but we are at the end of time. We promised everybody in the room that we would be done in an hour. We are now at the hour. I thank all of you, Chantz Strong from Destination Canada, Monique Smith with Global Public Affairs, Dr. Eddie Sheppard, the man with all the numbers, and B. Sarmiento from Holiday Inn Vacations coming to us from Tampa today. Thank you all very much. And we will do this again. And please come back and join us. We'll have another conversation. In the meantime, enjoy yourselves, everybody. Get out there and enjoy the sunshine.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.